I was gonna wait till 5:05 to see if we got some more students over, but we can begin the program. So I wanted to wish a very happy election day to everyone in the audience. And my first question is going to be, who has already voted? Woohoo! Okay. I was going to say, if you haven't yet voted, full permission to walk out this door right now and skip the program. But welcome, everyone. We're thrilled to welcome you to our very first Election Day program. My name is Dr. Sarah Spinner-Liska. I am the Kent State University Museum's new director. I've been here since July, and my focus is making sure that our world-class museum and our world-class collection is fully open to the university community, but also to the broader public. So welcome to all of you. Today we're going to be exploring how fashion can help tell stories from our past, from the lives of First Ladies to forgotten histories. And the specific focus will be on Elizabeth Keckley, who was born into slavery and then became a successful entrepreneur and the personal dressmaker in the White House to First Lady Mary Todd Lincoln. We have some experts in the room that we're very excited to welcome. But first, I wanted to mention that we're especially excited about this program because it is our first time partnering with neighboring museum in Canton, the National First Ladies Library and Museum. And so I want to give a big shout out to the First Ladies team who have put together the program with us, who brought a cape that Keckley made for Lincoln in 1861, and they'll be sharing more about that with us. But I want to acknowledge the president and CEO, Patty Dowd-Schmidt, Michelle Gullion, Director of Collections and Research, and a Kent State alumna, yes, and Stephanie Bonak, Director of Education and Outreach, who helped us put this program together. So a big round of applause for the First Ladies team. And we're also very thrilled to welcome our guest speaker, who we thought could be here in person, but will be joining us via Teams all the way from Los Angeles, Carmen Evelyn Nuita, a former bridal gown designer who wrote a book on Elizabeth Keckley called Lizzie, the Elizabeth Keckley Story, which has recently been adapted into a theatrical play that's set to debut in 2025. And we are thrilled to have you here with us today. Welcome, Carmen Evelyn. So we'll start the program with you, and then after your presentation, we're actually going to have Kent State University Museum curator Sarah Hume talk about the Keckley quilt the quilt attributed to Keckley, as Sarah would say, in our collection. And you all have a postcard that we made for the program today, so you can get a close look at that quilt for Sarah's presentation. And then Michelle, the curator from the National First Ladies Museum, come on in, will be talking directly about the cape that they've brought here to share with us today. So we're going to begin with Carmen Evelyn, and then we'll move on to the objects from our collection. So thanks again for being with us, and we're very excited to hear your story.
Thank you. Thank you all for making the time to come on this Tuesday, Election Day, this afternoon, to celebrate the life and legacy of Elizabeth Keckley. I especially wish to thank our esteemed attention that Elizabeth deserves, the attention those who come before you as way pavers and stewards of love and truth and justice all deserve, and to the future generations whose light must never be dimmed again also deserve. We are the beneficiaries of Lizzie's greatest will, and we must give this inheritance the attention it warrants. Today, as you all cast your ballots, may we honor the history of our past and pay close attention to our future as we move forward in claiming our birthright to be happy, to be sovereign, where we all hold space, no less than the moon, no less than the stars. Fashion is more than just an assembly of fabrics, notions, and trends. Fashion is a revolution that reminds us what it is to be human and to let that nature shine. All this time I was looking straight into the eye of the needle, and I am grateful to Elizabeth Keckley for helping me finally find my way through it. Today, we celebrate her as America's first couturier, whose artistry changed the course of history forever. Kent State University Museum, and the National First Ladies Library and Museum, thank you. You have made history today by giving Elizabeth Keckley her flowers and a seat at the head of the table. Thank you. May her story inspire all of us to pay attention closer, and may my work surrounding her life continue to be a declaration of my deepest gratitude to a woman who let the beauty she loved be what she did. Thank you so much, everyone, for this day in her honor.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. That was incredibly inspiring. And I also want to mention, for those who don't know, when Elizabeth Keckley was a professor at Wilberforce University, that was right here in Ohio. So we play a role in her story as well. Now we're going to pause and we're going to hear about some of the objects that Keckley actually made and share the power of our museum collections to tell stories. So first will be Dr. Sarah Hume, curator of the Kent State University Museum. So get your kind of postcards ready. We're going to be talking about the Keckley quilt and the museum collection.
Thank you, Dr. Sarah. Let's see if can we get the, okay. How do I do that? Ooh. Okay, hit a wrong button, yeah. Yeah, I can't do it. Oh, it doesn't like my password. Am I gonna get locked out? Wait, is caps lock on? Oh, caps lock is on. Oh, even better. dresses. And this is actually kind of an aside, but these two images, they're these totally different images of Mary Lincoln, and she's wearing different dresses, but she's got this same lace cape on. And if you look really closely, which I will admit I did, she's wearing the same jewelry. One of her bracelets is not the same, but one of the bracelets is the same, and then her necklace is the same, and there's some sort of pin at the front of the lace, which is the same. And we think of Mary Lincoln as being very, like having a lot of clothes, but it's interesting that she seems to be re-wearing the pieces in this case. And it's very much performative. She very intentionally got dressed in this outfit. It wasn't just what she happened to be wearing. She would have dressed for being photographed. So some of these dresses, as I said, do survive. There's a number of these dresses. This one is in the Smithsonian collection, and it's been reworked. You can see the bodice is not the same as the bodice in the photograph of her, but it's very clearly the same material. And this one came from a cousin of Mary Lincoln who owned it, and it was in the cousin's family until it was given to the Smithsonian. So the provenance of this is very clear. So again, it's assumed to be Keckley. And it's the dress itself is very simple. You can see the elaboration in when Mrs. Lincoln wore it came largely from the accessories that she added to it. And so all of the pieces that came, that survived, and generally a lot of pieces from the 1860s that survive to us don't have the laces, and they don't have the flouts, they don't have a lot of the trimmings, so they look quite plain. But that's not because they would have originally looked plain when they were worn. And then there's this outfit, which is a cape and dress ensemble, which is at the Chicago History Museum. Chicago and Illinois wound up with a lot of Lincoln stuff. And so this is one, and again, this is quite a bold piece. And you see the coordinated pieces, which was typical of dresses in the 1860s, that you'll see multiple bodices with the same. They'll invest a lot in these enormous skirts, and so it makes sense to get as much mileage out of it as you can, so they'll have multiple bodices. And so here's the one. McCarley mentioned the purple velvet dress, and this is probably the most famous dress that belonged to Mary Lincoln because it's in the Smithsonian and it's in their First Lady's gown collection. So this is the one that is used to represent Mary Lincoln. And this also had been given to a cousin of Mary Lincoln, and so it went down in the family, so it's fairly certain to have come down and have been Mary Lincoln's dress. And again, here you see the two bodices and the same skirt. And looking at it, the photograph of the day bodice the bodice appears much brighter than the color of the rest of it. And I wonder if that's because the Smithsonian displayed the dress for years and then it faded. That's sort of my take on what happened. Because they did for a while just have, I think, a set display of the dresses. I was really obsessed with the First Lady's gowns when I was a child. That was sort of the birth of my love of fashion. So this dress to me sort of feels like a mild celebrity. And then here's the thing that in terms of how we know who made the dresses, the label gets introduced. And the labels really don't appear in dresses until the 1860s. One of the people who was the first to put his name in his dresses was Charles Frederick Worth. And he was really a master at branding, and so he started putting the labels in dresses. But even in the biographies that were written of him, he actually attributed that to another woman who is largely forgotten by history, but Madame Roger, who put her labels in her dresses. So it wasn't Worth originating the idea. It was something that he caught on to and realized the power of. And so once people could put their name in the label, we could know who made these dresses. So I took some quick snaps of pieces from our collection that have labels. These are from the 1870s. I could think of one dress in our collection that's from the 1860s with a label in it, but in general, the pieces that are as early as Keckley's pieces for Mary Lincoln, that was really largely before labels happened. So are no original labels in her garments. So that's why so much of this dressmaking world is anonymous. And again, it is quite telling that it was Charles Frederick Worth who, as a man, puts a label in the dress and becomes this famous, like, couturier, who becomes the very celebrated man, milliner, or dressmaker, and attempts to sort of elevate couture into haute couture in the late 19th century. But generally, dressmaking was women's work, and these were anonymous women who did it. That brings me to the much awaited Keckley quilt that is in our collection. And we have much dispute among us here on the staff about the attribution to Keckley. Because as I said, there are no labels in the dresses, and this quilt does not come with a label, it comes with a story. And the story is passed down to us. We can trace it back to this woman, Ruth Finley, who owned the quilt. And she was actually a journalist, and she was kind of a colorful character in herself. She was an Ohio resident, and she wrote for a number of sort of local papers, and she did these undercover stories, and she would dress up as a maid and go into households and write these sort of exposés. So she was really a fascinating woman. And she became an expert on quilts, and she had a quilt collection. And among the pieces in her collection was this quilt, which she called the Mary Todd Lincoln quilt. And she said that it was made by the oral history that she passed down was that the quilt was made by Elizabeth Keckley of scraps of fabric from Mary Todd Lincoln's dresses, and that this quilt was given by Keckley to Mrs. Lincoln, and that it was in the White House during the White House years. That's the information we have. And it's not, it does not appear anywhere in Keckley's autobiography. So she doesn't make any, not only does she not make any mention of this quilt, she doesn't make any mention of quilting or quilt making or quilts or anything of the sort. It's possible that she worked full-time as a dressmaker and also made this unbelievably complicated quilt that has these raised embroidered patches. It has this amazing central medallion of a eagle and flag. So, it's possible the central motif that you can see on the postcard, it says liberty on it. And it is this wonderful thought that Mrs. Keckley, who bought her freedom from slavery and then went on to this incredible career, that she made this quilt. And it's also possible that this did belong to Mary Lincoln and was in the White House, and that was distributed from being in the White House, and whether or not it was made by Keckley, that may not have been part of its history. And I did read an analysis of this quilt which suggests that it was typical of Kentucky quilts, that it's a Kentucky style of quilt, and that would actually be in keeping with Mary Lincoln having this quilt and it being in the White House. There were many quilts in the White House, so that would have been a perfectly plausible situation. So this just reaches the limits of what we can know about these pieces, what we can take on faith from oral traditions, and what we can say about the people who made them. But one way or another, it is an absolutely amazing piece. Sadly, it's made of silk, which is shattering. So it's something that we can't bring out regularly, and we can't put it out here and have it on display for you. It's been on exhibition a couple of times since I've been here, and it is also of the 1860s or so. The fabrics are consistent with dressing fabric from the 1850s or 60s. So again, it is of the time. It is an absolutely amazing piece of work. It has the fringe, it has the tassels, it has this raised embroidery. It's an extraordinary piece. Is it Keckley's? I leave that to your decision.
Thank you, Sarah. I have some questions, and I'm sure you do as well. We're going to hold questions until the end, and then we can take questions with Carmen, Evelyn, or Dr. Soy, or Michelle. So we're going to jump to Michelle's presentation about this incredible cape from the National First Ladies collection that we have here on display tonight. So everyone, please welcome Senior Director of Curatorial Services, Director of Education and Outreach, Michelle Gallion.
Well, thank you. I want to thank everyone here tonight for being here. As usual, I'm so excited to always talk about women's history and also through First Ladies. I think Carmen kind of brought that up. Through First Ladies, you learn about the everyday, and Sarah did too. You learn about all the lost people and women who did amazing work, and you get a chance to bring them to life too. And I really appreciate it, and I love being a part of that tonight. Let's see. Let me go ahead and start here. This is by oral tradition. It is our Keckley capelet, we call it. I didn't come to the National First Ladies Library until 2005, and I inherited a big group of textiles that is, again, oral history, called the Van Cortlandt Collection. It was sold to Mary Regula, who's the founder of the National First Ladies Library, by a gentleman who was obsessed with First Lady fashion, himself dressed as a First Lady, did that kind of interpretation, and he, in his circles, knew about this Van Cortlandt collection. It was very highly known in that area. And Edie probably knows who I'm talking about, don't you, Edie? Yes, I think she probably got to see him perform. He was actually one of my mentors there at the National First Ladies Library. He knew so much about First Ladies. I learned a lot from him. And he knew about this collection. He sought it out, and he knew it came for sale, and he purchased it out of his own. He'd been given a trust fund. He used his trust fund money to purchase this collection. And then Mary Regula, the founder, she purchased it from him. He did not have anything but oral history on it. He said that wasn't important to him at the time. He knew these were First Lady gowns. Believe me, that was probably one of the biggest things that we disagreed about, was how important it was to actually have written provenance. Is very helpful. However, in a lot of these gowns, since you don't have labels, you don't have that type of thing, you do have inside this capelet and in several other of these pieces, you have written the names of who's the First Lady that it was owned by. You have an accession number of some type. In the Keckley gown, I'll show you, actually, I'll just forward here to show you that. You have this kind of thing where it's Mrs. A. Lincoln, 1861. You see their numbering, 00.61-03, and then gift of E.H. Keckley. What was fascinating to me about this when I saw this in this piece was the fact that it said E.H. Keckley, and it was a different, her name was spelled differently, and that they were using her middle initial, which you don't often see, which stands for Hobbs. So I thought that those kinds of clues are kind of interesting. that someone knew that much about who gave this to this Van Cortlandt collection people. We have had, since I've been there, I've had several people try to do research on the Van Cortlandt collection. I can tell you we come to dead ends every single time. So we have to go by what is written inside the gowns themselves, and we have to kind of go by, as I work with the First Ladies in the last 20 years, and I've gone to different presidential sites and actually helped at Springfield. I helped put on the gowns of a First Lady exhibit that was happening in the presidential site in Springfield, Illinois, President Lincoln's Museum. They did a big First Lady collection, and that was really wonderful education for me to actually see what was coming from these sites, that the size that these women were, and able to see what we had, and become feeling a little more secure in that. Whenever we display any of these things, we have to always put that it's attributed to, because we just don't have that written, the written provenance of how it came to be, but we do have that. So that's kind of how this came about. I wanted to show you, this is how it looks now, and you can see it there. This is how it first looked. Oops, there it is. This is how it kind of used to look. And that's making it look as good as we could, actually. It was very, very, there were all these repairs in the lace itself, and it made it almost impossible to display and make it look even halfway like something you want to see a First Lady wearing. And so in 2019, we were coming up on the 20th anniversary of women's right to vote, the 19th Amendment, and the National Portrait Gallery called and said they wanted to do a First Lady's portrait to match the presidential portraits that are on you can always go see that there at the National Portrait Gallery. They wanted to do one on the First Lady, so they actually, Gwendolyn Dubois, she actually came and spent a whole day with me, a really long day, and we went through books and what they had, and portraits, what they were looking for, and it was amazing how very sad that was, because you realize there are First Ladies that don't have portraits. We don't know what they look like, and that some of them were mislabeled. They were labeled as this is the First Lady when it wasn't. It was actually the second wife. Those types of things. So I was helping guide that element of it, and so when they realized that we had this Keckley capelet, and I showed them what the inscription was. They were very, very interested, and they had this capelet conserved. It went on display on November 13th, 2020, in the deep part of of COVID-19, the pandemic. Very few people got to see this exhibit. However, they did do this booklet. This book was published there. You can still purchase this booklet at the Smithsonian. It is to go with. It's sold with the presidential American President's book. It makes a nice little grouping there. However, I want to also point out you can always see these when you go to the Smithsonian. You won't see most of the things that are on display in here. Write your cards and letters and make sure you point that out to them, that there really needs to be a permanent First Lady exhibit too. Like I said, this is what the inscription says. I'm going to put this back here. It's cut, it's one whole piece, and it's cut in the round, and pinking shears were used on the edge of it to get that scalloped edge. So it's really, really, really unique. That it was conserved at ICN, Intermuseum Conservation Association up in Cleveland, and they said there was probably, they did quite an amazing talk about this in their notes. They believe that there was probably, as would have been what you would have done in the 1860s, there was probably a matching dress that went with this at one point. And the color is so unique. This pink and black is just really not what you expect. But as if you go through the timeline here at Kent State, you see these amazing colors and amazing things that these women are doing with their artistry. So I think it shows you how cutting edge Mrs. Lincoln was in her fashion. She was very fashion forward. And unfortunately, I also want to put in there, when they had this book done, they didn't, the conservation wasn't quite done, so when you open that up, you'll see that this poor picture in this book. You won't see the beautiful work that was done. But anyway, here's this book that was written, and here's the cape itself. So I want to make sure we have time for questions, and really I talk about anything else there is, but I just wanted to have our 2 cents for the cape. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really want to strongly encourage all of you after the presentation to come take a look at the cape itself, and to really have the opportunity to think about how these items from museum collections shed light on our pasts. My first question, I guess, and then I can open it up and I can come to any questions, is for you, Michelle. When, and Sarah, you mentioned that, that labels were not common. When do you think that label indicating that it was made by Keckley for Lincoln was made?
That's a really good question, because we can't find any provenance, and we can't find out that much about the Van Cortlandts themselves. We know they're from New York, we can tell you that. We know they were a very wealthy family. There's still, I think there's a mansion, a Van Cortland mansion in New York, but we can't find whose collection this was. And again, like you said, when did they write this in here? Was this written in here to make it look authentic? We just don't know. It's very frustrating.
Thank you. And I'm also going to note, I believe we have Carmen Evelyn also back. Maybe.
Not really.
We don't, I was going to say, okay, so maybe we'll have her back.
She's listening in, that's all I can do right now.
Okay, she's listening. So questions for Sarah or Michelle? Randy, Dr. Sullivan.
For Sarah King, talking through quilts, that quilts are made from remnants from other garments that are not used. Do you have any clues as to where these remnants of fabrics came from?
Can you hear me? The pieces very clearly look like dress. I mean, it looks like dress fabrics. There's like velvet and there's silk, but we don't know where they came from. And I mean, I've heard it floated. People are curious to sort of try and trace it back to the known Mary Lincoln dresses. And there really, I don't think there are that many Mary Lincoln dresses. I don't know that there's many more than 5 or 6. There's the 3 that I showed. There's like a strawberry dress. This one.
We supposedly have, again, in this Van Cortland collection, we supposedly have, I think, 2 or 3 dresses that were Mary Lincoln's. They're in very poor condition, but yeah, and I'm not sure that they don't say the same thing. They don't say anything about Elizabeth Keckley inside them. But yeah, we do have a few others. supposedly of hers.
Yeah, so I mean, then the job would be to go through the existing Mary Lincoln dresses and see if any of them are matching. But I mean, she must have had so many dresses that there's just over a period of years, so there's really no way to really, and a lot of them are not. I mean, there's a lot of plain, just solid color silks too, so it's not even like they're patterns that would be recognizable. And a lot of them are shattering. And the pieces, the quilt, if you look at it, there's a lot of tiny hexagons that are pieced together. And so you don't get a very big sample of what the fabric really looks like, and it's shattering. So it would be hard to make that sort of study.
And I'll just interject a question. You mentioned Mary Lincoln had to sell her dress collection. What was that about?
I don't know if I can sort of better about the. I mean, she was deeply in debt after her.
Yeah, she was deeply in debt, and she was always worried about money too. And so most first ladies would give their things away. However, Mary Lincoln wanted money for her things, and so she thought, because of the Lincoln name, because everyone was always hounding her, she thought people would want these dresses. However, just like most everything that happened with Mary Lincoln, when she did this, it's called the Old Dress sale, she received really bad press for selling her clothes. And so hardly any of those clothes were sold. No one bought them. She was scandalized again.
Thank you. We have some other questions here.
So I don't know what else of like the Keckley stuff is left, but is there anything with embroidery that might be able to like her embroidery style, since it's on the quilt, that might be attributed back that make people think she made it?
I don't know of anything that she has that's embroidered. I haven't seen. That's another thing that's kind of makes the story a little strange, is that it's this really elaborate style of embroidery, and it's not the kind of there are like the floral patterns, and there's little strawberries in the corner of the quilt and stuff. But the raised the eagles are this, they're stuffed and like embroidered over, and so that wouldn't be something that's consistent with. I mean, a dress wouldn't have that kind of embroidery. So they're not really even the kinds of embroidery that would be on a dress. And I don't know of any of the existing Lincoln dresses which are embroidered. It's not very typical of 1860s dresses, I don't think, to have that kind of embroidery. Yeah, I mean,
It is true.
the embroidery.
Yes, this is former director of
Is there a way of approximating what color the pink actually was? Is there a way of going backwards to find out what kind of dye was used or what the color really was? Because we see the faded example of what it is today. And even in the photograph, you can see how there's a variation even in the color.
Right.
It's really tough to say. You have to like, I have that flipped over. Sometimes you have to look underneath. You have to look at a scene to see what the real color was.
If it's folded.
Right, folded in. And even then you have to be careful, because sometimes where it touched on the body or whatever, it might make the body, all of that time, pollution, how light, all of that affects heat, body chemistry, what was, if you sweat. We have several gowns that the underarms are really quite a different color, because that person sweat underneath their arms, and it affects So it's so hard, I think, to really know what. I'm not sure how they go about finding that, but I would think you need to find something that hasn't seen the light of day, or very, very little bit of light of day.
Is there a way that they could probably do it scientifically?
There probably is, but I don't know.
You know, you could get chemical
Right, you get
Right,
the
yeah,
chemistry
like
or
dry
formula.
stuff, but you'll never really know.
Right,
I don't
exactly.
even know the chemicals, like even if you have a dye, even if you have a given dye, you can get different, like depending on how many times you dip it, or how long it's in, or what mortar you use, like it would make a different color. So I don't know that even chemically identifying what a dye was would ever tell you exactly what color. I mean, if something is really discolored to the point that it's lost, like whether it's purple or green or something, I mean, maybe in theory you can figure that out, but I don't know.
We have time for one more question. Any other questions? Okay. Well, I want to thank our guest speaker. I hope she can still hear us, but Carmen Evelyn, thank you so much for joining us here from California to share your own incredible story and how it's intersected with the story of Elizabeth Keckley. Thank you to our curators, the curator from the National First Ladies Library Museum, Michelle Gillian, Sarah Hume from the Kent State University Museum. Thanks to all of you for spending part of your election day here with us to absorb some fashion history and presidential history. Thank you, everybody.